Apologetic Live. So imagine this. You're a father living in the state of Florida. You got a 12-year-old daughter, and one day your 12-year-old daughter attempts suicide. You're shocked. You have no idea what's going on. And then you in turn find out that your daughter has socially transitioned to be a boy at school, and you were never made aware of it. On top of that, your daughter has been dealing with so many other psychiatric impairments that the school was completely aware of and told you nothing. And now you have a 12-year-old daughter who has attempted suicide and a father and a family that has to pick up the pieces. This is the story we're going to go through in the video we will be reacting to today. Again, this is out of Florida. Such a shocking video, but exactly what we've warned against with this sort of ideology seeping into our public schools and institutions. Let's get into it. As I said before, a 12-year-old in Florida attempted suicide after going through a very long-term struggle, it seems, with her gender identity, with other psychiatric comorbidities, and it all led up to a father finding out about all this because the school kept it from him. Here's the video of this father by the name of Wendell Perez going through his daughter's story and talking about the anguish that he and his family have gone through because of this.
In January of 2022, I went to my daughter's elementary school to deal with a very sensitive incident. My daughter attempted suicide by hanging in one of the school bathrooms. My wife and I were told that, by the school counselor that it happened because of an ongoing issue with her gender identity. We were in shock because our daughter never showed any signs of questioning her biological sex. We were told that they knew about the gender issue due to meetings they were having with our daughter behind our backs. We learned that during these meetings, our daughter's confusion was affirmed and validated through the use of fictitious male names and male pronouns. Our daughter was living a double life without our consent or knowledge.
What? Like, what? Are we listening to like what was just said in that minute? Imagine being the father, the mother, the siblings of this young girl in this scenario and finding out all of this information for the first time. You have a father here who has gone through what is the horrific realization that your daughter is struggling in this way, that a 12-year-old girl would decide to try to hang herself in the school bathroom. And on top of that, finding out from the school that they were aware of the struggle that she was going through and that they were in fact nurturing that struggle, pushing it forward, and blindly affirming a 12-year-old girl in this identity without telling mom and dad. Can you imagine just shockwave on top of shockwave on top of shockwave, finding out what has happened to your daughter? And all of this without your knowing consent. There's just so many levels of wrong to this, and the fact that he's keeping such a calm and cool composure while reading this letter of what's happened to him just blows my mind. I don't know how I would react as a parent hearing this sort of stuff, but this is exactly what we've warned against, because right now what we have is this sort of gender ideology being injected into our public schools, our institutions, our corporations, media, Hollywood, you name it, it is there. And what we have coupled with that is teachers, educators, administrators going, you know what? We agree with this dogma, and if your parents don't, we're your new parents. We're the ones who are going to take on your care. We're the ones who are going to take on that responsibility. And are they going to do as good of a job as your normal parents would? Probably not. And this is evidence of it. And this is not the first time that this has happened. We've reacted on the show before to a mother in tears at a school board meeting talking about her daughter, who also struggles with suicidal ideation, who had expressed gender confusion, and the school took her in and said, you know what, we'll give you new pronouns, we'll give you a new name, and we won't tell your mom. And look at what the outcome is of that. It's almost as if you should allow parents to know this sort of information about their child. It's almost as if you have a duty to tell parents when their child is struggling like this. Secondly, it's almost like blind affirmation of gender confusion doesn't exactly fix the problem, because that's exactly what the school was doing here. And look what you ended up with, a 12-year-old girl who was dealing with so much inner turmoil that she decided to hang herself in the school bathroom.
She was affirmed and socially transitioned in school. Due to the nature of the incident, our daughter was Baker active and taken away from us with minimal contact for over a week until she was released under our care. As a family, we had to pick up the pieces, clean up the mess, and start a period of painful healing. However, we decided as parents from the beginning that we were not going to affirm the dysphoria. We were not going to validate a delusion, contrary to the recommendation from some professionals.
Important stuff that he just said there. Said we made a decision as parents that we were not going to just go and blindly affirm this. In fact, we're not going to affirm the identity of my 12-year-old daughter. And while that can sound like a very harsh thing, and I'm sure there are so many people tweeting at this video and saying what a disgusting thing to do as a parent to not allow your child to be who they want to be. And that's not what he's doing, is where I will go out on a limb, and that's what I'll say. And it's very important that he says some experts told me to come through and just affirm my daughter. Some, because there are many experts who will tell you the exact opposite, that there's a different form of therapy for children like this that does not focus on just affirming all it is that they say and all it is that they believe that they are to be. You can still go through therapy in what is a compassionate form of treatment that allows children to process these feelings, to process these ideas, and still come to the conclusion that, hey, there are different ways to be a girl. There are different ways to be a boy. And I might be a particularly masculine woman, or I might be a particularly feminine man. And those things are okay. And going through the process of acknowledging that through compassionate treatment is the best thing that you can probably do for your child. At least with what the data and the studies that we have so far, that's what is shown. So for a school to go, no, we're just going to ignore all that. We're going to ignore what should be our duty to tell parents when their kids are dealing with something like this. We're going to ignore all of that, and I'm just going to give free rein to this 12-year-old to decide who it is they want to be, what their new name is, what their pronouns are, and we'll write that into the way that this school operates, and we won't tell your parents. Disgusting, and I just imagine when this lawsuit goes through, because he has filed a lawsuit, there's going to be a very expensive payout for what they've done here.
In the field. We provided, actually we did provide unconditional support with proper mental health care and non-affirming therapy to our daughter. Underlying disorders like depression and anxiety were properly treated. We removed her from the school environment and placed her in homebound. We brought her back from her confusion. She is steadfast and sure of her gender, and the suicidal ideation is gone. This semester, actually, she is ready to go back to the brick and mortar school setting. In summary, our daughter was suicidal when she was being affirmed. However, when she was brought back from that state of confusion, the suicidal ideation disappeared completely.
Wow, imagine that. Imagine there's a different form of treatment than going through the painstaking process of just affirming your child, putting them through a medical transition period of puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, sex reassignment surgery, which involves, let's go through the details here, taking skin and body parts from other areas of your body and creating genitalia. For women, either stopping the process of creating breasts through puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy, or just lopping them off surgically. These are the things we're talking about under the beautiful names of gender-affirming medical care and sex reassignment surgery. These things all sound very, very benign, very neutral, like there's nothing. This can happen overnight and everything's going to be fine and the recovery period is nothing. But what these are, in fact, are experimental surgeries that have not been done or studied in a long-term setting whatsoever, and there are now a group of people who are advocating for minors to be able to go through them. And this very well could have happened to his daughter in a different set of situations where he never became aware of it, or when he did become aware of it and said, you know what, I'm not going to affirm that, had his daughter taken away from him, which is happening to so many parents across the United States now. There are so many horrible ways in which this situation could have ended. But luckily, this young girl's suicide attempt was unsuccessful. Imagine had she been successful, and now you have the parents and the family just sitting in a mess that could have been utterly avoidable had they just been alerted by school administrators, teachers, apparently mental health professionals. Had they just been alerted and told, your daughter's going through this, and expressed a little bit of concern. How do you want to deal with this? Because in fact, this is a discussion that we should not really be having in school, unless it's affecting her schoolwork and maybe she needs to go to a guidance counselor. And we'll get into a discussion later in the show of what we think schools are meant to be for. Because right now, schools are operating as like secondary households where you go and you're having conversations about sexual relations and sexuality and what gender you are and your race and how that affects your place in America and mental health and all these different things. Are schools really meant for that? Are schools meant to facilitate the sort of discussions that this 12-year-old should have had with her parents and with mental health professionals? I'm going to go out on a strong limb here and say no. That's not what schools are for. And so long as we keep treating schools like they're for this, these are the situations that are going to be brought about. So let's hear the end of his remarks, and we'll close out on this story and move on to the next one. It does get worse.
Therefore, my daughter's case disproves the current narrative that the lives of children with gender dysphoria are in jeopardy if they do not get affirmed. If you validate one delusion, then what is next?
A great question to end it on. You know, we love when things end on a question. If you validate one delusion, then what is next? And for 12-year-olds specifically, this is a very harmful delusion to go and validate, and probably a delusion that was put in place by the school system itself. I don't imagine she was just independently introduced to this sort of idea of being confused about your gender and then was just in happenstance in a school that was going to facilitate this process for her without telling her mom and dad. I imagine they played a very heavy hand in leading her down the path that eventually led to an attempted suicide. And now here's a father who is luckily filing a lawsuit and now has to deal with the broken pieces of all of this. And now you have a 12-year-old who's going to have to deal with the reality of what she's been through and this attempted suicide her entire life. Is there enough money in the world to really make up for what this 12-year-old has gone through? I mean, you guys decide. Put that down in the comments below. And we did ask the poll, do you think the father reacted in this situation appropriately? 75% of you said yes, just right. 4% of you said no, too strong. Interesting. And 21% of you said no, not strong enough. I commend him for keeping his composure and being very calm about the way he treated the situation. I think there is something to be said about being calm in situations that in my world certainly do not warrant being calm. I would be just a firestorm in whatever setting he's in right now, talking about my daughter, has she been placed in this situation. But sometimes a firestorm is not helpful. Sometimes the most helpful thing to do is to come through and calmly express what's happened to you. And I think because he did that, his story is going to have such an impact on people who hear about this and see what's happening in their schools. Completely disgusting. I hope he gets millions and millions of dollars in the payout from this school for what they've done. And I hope his daughter is able to recover from this, and hopefully others learn a lesson about how to have these conversations with your children. You don't need to make your child confused about your gender, and in fact, that's one of the worst things you could probably do to your child in looking at the outcomes. And yeah, that's where we close out on that. Taylor, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for, like you said, the ability that he had to remain calm in the midst of what is an infuriating situation. I mean, as soon as he explained what had happened, you should have seen our chat just when it went crazy with people like, I'd be livid, I'd be screaming. But in fairness, we've said on the show, we've been critical of people on the left when they come out and with these like crazy, angry screeds in the wake of like a shooting situation, and it's just like, just because you feel passionate about something, that doesn't make you right. You still have to, like, what do adults tell kids? Use your words. And that's the power of free speech. What's powerful about this video is not only that he remained calm, because if you're just calm and you don't use your words to say the truth and say powerful things, then okay, you are kind of being a pushover.
Right.
But if you remain calm and zero in on the truth of the matter and say, no, we decided we are not going to affirm this, but the people who talked her into this and pushed this on her made her confused, made her suicidal. When we got her out of that confusion, the suicidal ideation stopped. Those are all very powerful, poignant and pointed statements that he made that pointed out and elucidated the truth of the matter at hand. And it makes the people who are pushing this stuff look like the crazy ones.
Yep.
Instead of, if he would have reacted unhinged, they can spin that and say, well, you're just being this emotional wreck. It's not that big a deal, blah, 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 blah. And so I think there's a lot of power in not only remaining calm, but being calm and using your speech.
Yep. And it's so wild because people on the left are going to watch this and come after him.
Yeah.
And attack him. And I can already see the statements that are going to be made now. They're going to be like, you put your daughter in conversion therapy. That's why she's saying she's not a boy and this and that. It is unbelievable. All because we've made up our minds that this is the way that things should be, that kids can decide what gender there are, and there's no other answer. There's no other solution. In fact, it's not even a problem. It's not even a problem for a kid to be confused about their gender. In fact, it is a good thing. It is something that should flourish and should be encouraged even. So this dad's going to deal with hate and backlash for saving his daughter's life. Clown world.
It's the classic, it's not happening. Okay, it is happening, but it's a good thing that it's happening, and you're a bigot for saying that it shouldn't be happening.
Right.
It's kind of, we see that pattern.
And then he goes, what about the suicide part? Unrelated.
Yeah, and what do we talk? We talk about that on the show all the time. The willingness to overlook harm, the
Yep.
willingness to overlook how defund the police harms minority communities, the willingness to overlook how this transgender ideology actually harms the very people with gender dysphoria that they're trying to help or pretending to. I just wanted to also read the super chat from Sup My Dude. It says, it's shocking how close-minded and woke teachers are today, and how suddenly it happened. This stuff didn't happen when I was a kid, and I'm 33. And as someone who's in their early 30s as well, I can attest to that.
I mean, when I was a kid in public school, we were not talking. It wasn't until I got to high school that I met somebody who identified as transgender. And that was one person, the first time I'd ever met anybody who identified as transgender. And I actually was on the left at the time. So did this like whole campaign of like, we need to accept and we need to open up the bathrooms and all these different things for this one singular person who identified as transgender. And I wish I had the knowledge that I have now. To have used compassionately back then when meeting that person, because knowing it now and looking back, you go, oh man, I like saw that stuff, and there was questions that could have been posed. Not that I was want to impose on this person's life or their viewpoint of who they are as a person, but just have questions and open up a dialogue around these things rather than being like, no, this is the way it is. This is the way it's gonna be, and I'm gonna deal with this for the rest of my life. And in hearing this story, you just have to imagine how easy it is to convince a 12-year-old of that. Any 12-year-old who's a little bit uncomfortable with themselves, maybe doesn't have too many friends, is struggling with finding out what their interest is, what they like, what they dislike, maybe leans a little bit more on the masculine side as a girl, and then you tell them, oh, well, there's this thing you can do, and it's going to make you feel so much better, and it's going to make you feel so much more comfortable with who you are as a person. Take a matter of minutes for a 12-year-old to be like, yeah, sign me up. I want to feel better right now because I'm 12 years old and my mind is malleable and I'm into instant gratification and I'm so uncomfortable because my brain is really not capable of taking in all the stimulus of the world and coming to an adult and mature conclusion about these things. So yeah, I'll take the thing that's going to get me acceptance. Yeah, I'll take the thing that causes literally any change because I just need change right now. That you have to imagine that this is going to be an epidemic among young people, and it already is. Like the rates at which people are starting to identify as non-binary and transgender are unbelievable, and there's just so many reasons why that's an easy thing to grab for and to identify as. So there's going to be so many more stories like this, and again, so often the people who are susceptible to identifying as transgender or actually having body dysmorphia have other psychiatric problems. And if you go, well, it's simply the gender thing and it's because mom and dad didn't accept it and you guys didn't create a culture of acceptance, that's why she attempted suicide. Let's just forget the depression. Let's just forget the anxiety. And then those things pop up and all of a sudden you have a child who is no longer alive. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about life and death. And as much as the left likes to say we're the ones coming after trans lives and we're the ones who are taking their lives, that's not the case at all. Look at the studies, look at the research. It's their form of treatment that is actually leading to that. So we really are talking life and death here. And luckily, this 12-year-old got to survive to hopefully tell the tale at some point, although it's not on her because it's not her fault. She should never have to talk about this really another day in her life because it really wasn't her choice. But anyways,